Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was never the popular kid in school. Being the only child of a single mother who worked two jobs to keep us afloat meant I didn't have the latest gadgets or trendy clothes. We lived in a small flat above the local chip shop in our tiny English town, and the constant smell of fried food that clung to my clothes didn't exactly help my social status. But all of that would have been manageable if it wasn't for him, the son of the local property developer who owned half the buildings in our town. He started tormenting me from the first day of secondary school. At first, it was just the usual stuff, knocking my books out of my hands, accidentally spilling drinks on me in the cafeteria, making up cruel nicknames that somehow always stuck. But as we got older, things got worse, much worse. One day, I begged him to leave me alone, telling him I hadn't done anything to deserve this treatment. He responded by shoving me against the lockers, saying my mere existence was enough reason. He mocked my clothes, pointing out how I wore the same 3 shirts repeatedly, and suggested my mom couldn't even afford to do laundry properly. I snapped back at him, saying at least my mom cared about me, and asked when was the last time his parents were even home. That comment earned me the worst beating of my life. He caught me behind the gym after school with 2 of his mates. I ended up with 3 broken ribs and a concussion so bad I missed 2 weeks of school. The school nurse saw everything, but nothing came of it. His father was on the school board after all. After the beating, he threatened me, saying if I told anyone about what happened, he'd make sure my mom lost her job at the pub, reminding me that his dad owned the building. I kept my mouth shut. We couldn't afford to lose that income. The years dragged on like this until he finally left school when I was 17. I started coming out of my shell, made some real friends for the first time. Turns out I was actually quite funny when I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. My grades improved, and I even started getting invited to parties. But living in a small town means you can never really escape your past. He was still around, friends with some of my new friends, dating a girl from my year. I managed to avoid him mostly until that night at the pub when we were celebrating our exam results. I was having a great time with my mates when he spotted me. He approached our group and grabbed me in a headlock, asking my friends why they were hanging out with someone like me. One of my friends tried to defuse the situation, asking him to leave me alone as we were just trying to have a good night. He responded by tightening his grip and telling me that my friends only hung out with me because they felt sorry for me, calling me a poor little charity case. I could have fought back. I wasn't that scared little kid anymore. But then I overheard him bragging loudly to his mates about the party he was planning. He was telling them about how he had everything sorted in his car, 13 bags of cocaine, 30 pills, and some ketamine, boasting about how mental the party was going to be. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I waited until he left, snapped a quick photo of his number plate, and made a call to the police. I told them I'd witnessed someone driving under the influence, claiming I'd seen him snorting something in the pub toilets before getting behind the wheel. I gave them his license plate number and the direction he was heading. I expected maybe a warning, possibly a ruined party. What I didn't expect was the complete demolition of his life that followed. The police found everything in his car. Turns out he had a previous record for possession, which I hadn't known about. He lost his university place and his parents finally had enough. They cut him off completely. No more trust fund, no more paid for flat, nothing. He tried to save his own skin by giving up his supplier. Word got around quickly in our small town. 3 weeks later, he was found behind that same pub where he used to torment me, stabbed multiple times. He survived, but now he's got a colostomy bag for life. Last I heard, he's living in a council flat on benefits, can't find work with his record, and spends his days avoiding his old friends, who now want nothing to do with him. Sometimes he comes into the pub where I now work as the manager, the same pub his father used to own before he had to sell it after some financial troubles. He can barely afford a pint, and every time I serve him, I make sure to give him my biggest smile. I've been working as a mall security guard for the past 6 years. It wasn't my first choice of career, but after getting laid off from my office job during a company restructure, I needed something stable. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at it. Being a 5'4" woman in my mid-30s means people often underestimate me, but that usually works to my advantage. Last week, I was pulling a brutal 17-hour shift that included overnight duty. The mall is guarded 24/7, and sometimes we have to cover extra hours when someone calls in sick. Around 11 p.m., I was doing my usual patrol, keeping an eye on some maintenance workers in the food court, when our night janitor waved me over. 2 police officers were with him. We've been having some issues with the local police department showing up without properly checking in with security first, but I let it slide. They asked me about a silver truck with a light bar that had been driving around the property. This caught my attention because our security vehicles are white with very visible company decals. I told them I hadn't seen any silver truck, but assured them I would check it out right away. After making sure the mall was secure, I headed outside and spotted the truck. More dark gray than silver, but whatever. It had some security company name I'd never heard of written on it, along with what looked like the guard's name and a phone number. I approached the vehicle cautiously, and when I asked if I could help him, he just threw the same question back at me with an attitude. I identified myself as mall security and told him he was on private property and needed to leave. He responded by stating that he was security too, as if that explained everything. I tried explaining that while I understood he was security, I was specifically the mall's security, and he wasn't authorized to be there. I warned him that if he didn't leave, I would have to call the police. Instead of cooperating, he threatened to call the police himself and have me removed for trespassing. His tone was getting increasingly aggressive, and he kept talking over me every time I tried to speak. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. You know that tone some men use when they think a woman is playing at doing a man's job. Yeah, that one. So I called the police. Then I had to call my boss and the mall general manager. While I was on the phone with my GM, the other guards started shouting something unintelligible but clearly aggressive. My GM heard it and told me to keep my distance. The police called back and told me they'd already spoken to the guy. Apparently, he claimed one of our anchor stores had hired him to watch their store overnight. My GM confirmed this with the security company. The store had indeed hired them without telling us or getting permission to use mall property. My GM said the guard could stay for the night, but only in the parking lot directly by the store. When I tried to relay these instructions, things got even more ridiculous. I attempted to tell him about the important instructions from the mall manager, but he cut me off saying he'd just talked to his boss and everything was fine, telling me to run along. When I tried to explain about the restrictions, he became even more belligerent, loudly declaring that he didn't have to listen to anything I said, repeating it even louder to drown out my voice. Then he rolled up his window and completely ignored me. I had to call the police back to have them relay the instructions because this grown man refused to listen to a woman doing her job. The next morning, all hell broke loose. The store manager had a long meeting with my GM, and the security company launched an investigation. A few days later, their corporate office asked me to provide a detailed account of what happened. The woman I spoke with apologized profusely and assured me the guard would be dealt with. We never saw that guard again. They sent someone else, someone who actually knows how to act professionally and doesn't throw a tantrum when a woman tells him what to do. I found out that not only did he get fired, but the security company lost their contract with the store. Apparently, his behavior violated several company policies, and when they reviewed his vehicle's dash cam footage, it only made him look worse. The store now has to use our mall security for any extra coverage they need, which means they have to deal with me even more often. I've worked in the automotive parts department for 5 years now. It wasn't my dream job initially. I actually studied marine biology in college, but life has a way of steering you in unexpected directions, and when my father's auto shop needed someone reliable to manage their parts department, I stepped in temporarily. That temporary position turned permanent when I discovered I had a knack for inventory management and actually enjoyed the work. Everything was going fine until about 2 years ago when this one technician joined our team. From day one, he made it clear that he thought being barely over 5 feet tall made him Napoleon reincarnated. He'd strut around the shop like he owned the place, talking down to everyone despite having to literally look up at most of us. One day, when I handed him a transmission filter he'd requested, he sneered at me and complained about how long it took. He even made a snide comment asking if I spent all day painting my nails back there. When I explained that I was helping another technician and we handle requests in order, he just scoffed. He told me his time was more valuable than others and demanded that I drop everything whenever he needed something. These interactions became our daily routine. I could handle it initially. I've dealt with difficult people before. But then, two things happened simultaneously. We started a massive renovation project in our department, and I found out I needed major reconstructive surgery. The surgery wasn't a surprise. I've had issues with my feet and legs since childhood. Years of working on concrete floors finally forced me to address it. The doctors were clear. I'd need surgery and would be wheelchair-bound during recovery. The timing wasn't great with the renovation, but we had to make it work. Our department looked like organized chaos during construction. I spent hours ensuring the floor space remained clear for my upcoming wheelchair needs, even though it meant utilizing every bit of vertical storage we had. The other parts personnel, old tall like me, were fine with this arrangement. But our short-tempered technician, he turned into a complete nightmare. When he couldn't find an oil filter in its usual place, he threw a fit. When I explained about the reorganization due to construction and that it was now on the top shelf, he called me stupid and demanded to know how he was supposed to reach it. I tried suggesting he could ask for help or use our stepladder, but he cut me off mid-sentence. He yelled that he didn't need my help and stormed off after demanding I keep things where he could reach them. He stormed off, but that gave me an idea. Since he was so insistent on being independent and had been making everyone's life miserable, why not give him exactly what he wanted? I spoke with management about giving him special permission to access the parts area himself, something usually restricted to parts personnel only. They agreed, probably tired of his constant complaints. That's when Operation Top Shelf began. Every single commonly requested part was methodically moved to the highest shelves. For us tall folks, it just meant a slight stretch. For him, it meant dealing with the step ladder, a hollow metal tube type that was technically meant for parts department use only. He'd steal that ladder constantly, leaving it all over the shop, never returning it where it belonged. Heaven forbid he asked for help. His ego wouldn't allow it. He'd rather waste 15 minutes hunting down the ladder than spend 30 seconds asking someone to grab a part for him. Then came the day of the concrete pour for our renovation. I was chatting with the construction workers during their break, and the topic of our challenging technician came up. They'd had their own run-ins with him apparently. One of the construction workers mentioned how the technician had been moving their equipment without permission and nearly caused an accident the previous week. When I shared how he kept taking and misplacing our ladder, the worker got this gleam in his eye. With a mischievous grin, he suggested that since concrete pours take all day, some might accidentally find its way into the hollow ladder tubes. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and went back to work. Later that afternoon, I noticed our ladder had gotten significantly heavier, about 60 pounds heavier to be exact. The next morning was pure poetry in motion. I watched as he stormed into the parts department, spotted the filter he needed on the top shelf, and went for the ladder. When he tried to pick it up, he sputtered in confusion, demanding to know what was wrong with the ladder. I innocently replied that it had been working fine just yesterday. He struggled, red-faced, to drag the concrete-filled ladder across the floor. Too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit defeat. After 5 minutes of watching him wrestle with the ladder like a cat trying to carry a watermelon, I decided to twist the knife just a bit. I sweetly offered that if he ever needed help reaching anything, any of us would be happy to assist. No ladder required. The look he gave me could have melted steel, but for the first time in 2 years, he didn't have a snappy comeback. He just grunted, finally managed to prop up the ladder, and climbed it with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much. I've been working at this marketing firm for about 3 years now. Started as a junior copywriter right after college. Managed to work my way up to senior position through countless late nights and sacrificed weekends. The pay wasn't great, but I figured the experience would look good on my resume. Our boss, let's just call him CEO, took over the company about 8 months ago after his father retired. The difference was like night and day. While the old man was strict but fair, his son turned out to be this entitled nightmare who thought running a company meant treating it like his personal playground. Everything was fine until December rolled around. CEO called an emergency meeting one morning, acting all excited like a kid who just discovered sugar. He enthusiastically announced that we were starting a new holiday tradition, a mandatory Secret Santa. The word mandatory already had me worried, but it got worse. He went on to explain with way too much excitement that to make it extra special, we were all going all out. Each person would draw a name and get them something from a specific wish list with a minimum spend of $500. My co-worker, who I'll call Brave Soul, spoke up hesitantly, pointing out that $500 was quite steep. CEO dismissed her concerns with fake cheerfulness, insisting that it was the holidays and we were all family here. He then started passing around pieces of paper. When I got mine, I nearly choked. The paper indicated I was supposed to buy his wife a Gucci handbag, black leather with gold hardware, for $2,800. I heard another coworker quietly reading that they had to get his daughter an iPhone 15 Pro Max. Someone in the room nervously asked if there had been a mistake, noting that all the names seemed to be his family members. CEO confirmed this with enthusiasm, rambling about how his wife, kids, and parents were practically our family too, especially since we spent more time at work than at home anyway. I spoke up, cutting through his nonsense by pointing out that this wasn't actually Secret Santa. He just wanted us to buy luxury gifts for his family. He got defensive, telling me not to be negative and insisted this was about building team spirit. Then came the threat. Participation was mandatory, and anyone who didn't support the team would face consequences. The room fell silent. Most of my coworkers make between $45,000 to $65,000 a year. A $2,800 handbag would be nearly 2 months' rent for me. That's when I remembered something. During my late nights at the office, I've been copying important documents, just in case. Call it paranoia, but after seeing how CEO treated people, I wanted insurance. Among those documents were emails between him and the company accountant about creative bookkeeping to avoid taxes. I stood up. With all the confidence I could muster, I suggested that I had a better idea for team spirit, specifically that I could email the Internal Revenue Service about his creative bookkeeping. His face went white. I continued, explaining that I had copies of everything, all the creative deductions, the fake business expenses, even that consulting fee he'd been paying to his shell company. When he tried to call my bluff, I simply pulled out my phone and showed him the folder. Then I laid out my terms. The Secret Santa nonsense would be cancelled. Anyone who had already bought gifts would be reimbursed from his personal account. And if anyone in the room faced any kind of retaliation, these documents would go to both the IRS and the Department of Labor. While he sputtered about loyalty and family, I wasn't finished. I added that I would be getting a raise, along with everyone else in the room, essentially the holiday bonus he'd canceled last month to fund his new boat. Looking around the room, I saw my co-workers trying to hide their smiles. CEO had no choice but to agree. He knew I had him cornered. That was 2 weeks ago. We all got our raises, the Secret Santa scam was cancelled, and CEO has been surprisingly quiet lately. Word is his father heard about the whole thing and is considering coming out of retirement to help manage the transition. Turns out the best gift this holiday season wasn't a Gucci bag or an iPhone. It was watching an entitled boss realize he couldn't get away with treating his employees like personal ATMs. And those documents, they're still safely stored away, just in case CEO needs another reminder about the true meaning of family. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.